Thank you everybody for coming, for choosing us, flying with us. But no, my name is Martin Rojas. I am AI acceleration lead at Play on Sports. I've been getting the great opportunity in my work and then kind of what I do with the community to just really dig into AI and kind of make it my approach. And to get going, and today's talk is going to be about how, some of the just basics of prompting. But what I mean by prompting is it's a new skill that we all need to develop. You're prompting when you're talking to ChatGPT, when you're talking to your coding agents now, not just when you're building agentic AI. It's all in the same model, so it's beneficial. Honestly, it's going to become more and more as customer service bots are in there. If you know how to write that response, how to question, you're going to get better and better answers. Who's, just by a raise of hands, who's here heard the term code switch? Code switching? No, there you go. We got some. No. Yeah, it's in. It's an English term. What essentially means, and it's something we do, right? Oh, write this email in a professional manner, right? That's what it means. When you're talking with friends, you're talking differently. When you're talking in an email at work, you're talking differently. AI is becoming a new code switch. It's becoming a new way that you have to write or present your ideas to make sure you get the best answer. And that's what I'm going to. Throughout this talk, I kind of want to, I'm kind of going to take you from just the beginning, what is in a prompt, what's in there, the stuff you don't see, and kind of why that matters. And then just kind of build up technique. And I'm hoping that you'll see as the things that you've been doing you're getting results or you're getting in there. I want to give a name to them. I want to be able to help you understand why you're doing the things the way that you're doing when you're talking to your Claude Code, when you're talking to Codex, or even in Cursor in there. To begin here, every LLM, no matter how advanced they get, they kind of still break down into these, right? There is always the system message. This is the stuff that goes into every conversation, the instructions. If you're building something, this is where you're telling it what you want it to do. Besides the actual iterative conversation, this is that behind there. If you're using a tool like Codex or Claude, there's a bunch of stuff that goes behind that tells it how it works, how to do things. Still just a prompt. It's the same way that you write the message you write and you write that back there. It's the same in there. You have your instructions, you have your context. That's what we've heard. Every other presentation is all about context engineering. What it means is that all these LLMs right now, they don't remember what conversation. Every time you're sending a message, it is looking at it new. If you have been carrying a conversation, it is sending that entire conversation back, and that becomes part of the context, right? It is everything that it knows for I am looking at this thing fresh every time, and I am using what I am given to do what I need to do, and then autofill the next part. Using examples, that helps it tell it how it's going to respond because it can base things off each other. Constraint is how far you want it to go the guardrails, or even just in the way that you type things out. Those are constraints and the limiters. So I am just using this so we have a shared vocabulary, right? As I keep going and I keep going these terms, you can always kind of refer back, and this is what I mean by them. Beginning, basic thing, it all boils down to text, and Markdown it's become kind of the language. Why? Because it's only text, but it gives it some constraints, it gives some limiters, it gives the text you're giving it, it gives it a shape, it gives it a structure. And for any of this prompting, anything that you can do to give text more structure or more context, more meaning, it's going to be beneficial. That is one of the key things. So understanding the basics of Markdown and kind of what it does and how you see it at a weight level is if it looks nicer to a human, it will help end up making a better prompt, right? At putting your headings, putting your bold text, your italics, all of that will help end up give you a better result for when you're asking it to do every one of those steps. Because I tend to work better and for presentations through examples. This rest of the presentation is going to be iterating through this example, right? This is probably a question you're giving it, even though it's not engineering focused. I kind of want it this way, so you can take the slides and take it back to your company. You can share this out, and it makes sense to non-technical people, right? But it's a conversation you probably gotten from the data of, hey, enterprise churning, like now a lot of assumptions like, oh, AI can just answer this if I ask it like this one-line question. We know that's going to hallucinate. It's going to give you very bad answers no matter how much work you do around it. So, what's wrong with this one? There's no defined risk. There's no, you don't even know what an enterprise customer is, right? You have to teach it that. There is none of that. So from here, we're going to kind of go through some of the basic beginnings of a prompt and how you build up step by step. That first one was that zero shot. You just ask it a question. Most of the conversations you have with any of these models, foundational models, are going to be zero shots. And for a lot of things, it's fine, right? A lot of these will start building up, but that's just the name of it. It's a zero shot. It means you're throwing out of the blank. You're giving it in there. Now, once you're, the next step out of that is you give it a basic example. It's like, hey, this is sort of the answer that I'm looking for, and then you ask it the question. That'll start getting you a little bit of a better response. You can give it different qualifiers. If you're not sure, like, hey, this is if this is the case, for example, like a high-risk customer, this is how we want that answer response. If it's a medium risk, I would want that, and then you ask it the question. You start giving it positive and negatives, or you start saying like, no, this is not the right answer that I don't want, and that's almost as helpful, telling it what you don't mean, what you don't want out of it. The next step out of that, I think, is one of the most common things we see in any prompting thing is telling it like, act like something, act like a analyst, act like an engineer, act like this. That can be really powerful because there is a lot of meaning and context that go into that word. The risk is you don't know what to an LLM, to a foundational model, what that role means, right? To ChatGPT, they may have been trained by an engineer or an analyst, being a Java, being a software, being a junior. All of that has very different connotations, and we can get you there. It can become a base, or you can define what that role means for you, right? And even the example, you can be like, when I say engineer, when I say analyst, I mean somebody that does these things, right? That's how it kind of starts building up into it. And as you start prompting, you start getting a feel for what those sort of keywords are. Just last week, if you go on Anthropic's blog, they go into a little bit of how they defined it and how they're thinking about these roles in their constraints, and they call it character sheets, right? They're treating their agents and their models like actors. When you tell it like, don't be evil or don't do this bad, what does that mean? What does that implication mean? And it's a really great blog post about how they think about it and kind of the in there behind it. Because these models are trained on a lot of just literature, a lot of the assumptions and built in there is the characters that they read in their stories and how they're acting out. They're almost acting out like a character. So getting better at defining what that character actor sheet is can help create a much better response from it. Like in your system message, think of it when you're defining what that persona is or who it's coming. If you're making a code reviewer, define what that code reviewer, what the characteristics of that code reviewer is, right? Is it somebody that's really detailed? Somebody that's looking at the strategy? Somebody that's looking at this? Almost like that persona. And then we start now getting into the techniques. One of the first things that we need to when you're talking prompts is clarity and specificity, right? I think one of the things that we see when we talk hallucination and when you ask people, oh, we did this wrong, what does that mean? What do you mean by wrong, right? It just means that you know the bigger context and it wasn't the answer you were expecting. It is an autocomplete. All these foundational models are an autocomplete and they're just giving you what that answer is. It's up to you. It's been, my 9th grade geometry teacher, one of the big things was like, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. And that is honestly, with AI, is the biggest thing. It's like, the biggest thing you can do in your prompts or anytime you're talking to it, it is to define all those assumptions and get them spelled out, right? if you spec-driven development, everything that we do is really to make sure that we are sharing the same assumptions, or we have spelled them out, or we have corrected them. So it's the same thing, it goes into the prompt. Here in the example, we can kind of see like where we need to be like, now the enterprise customers, it means from this budget to this budget. That's getting specificity of what a customer is. What that, what does it mean when it says at risk, right? What is that business reasoning for at risk? It means we drop this much, right? It's adding that clarity of like, what we mean when we're saying certain terms. Just kind of a few notes, like this was, it changes so quickly, but like GPTs overall, they really like when you spell things out in numbers. Same thing when you're using that prompt, that technique's in there. Claude, it's getting a little better, but same thing. It needs to be told when to stop. Otherwise, it will keep over-explaining and things. And Gemini really likes to use breaking things out by headings. Using that like heading 1, heading 2. It works a lot better with those. Now, going on to the next, kind of that next technique is the chain of thought. I'm sure we've heard a lot of terms. It seems like complicated. What it really breaks down to, it is you describing in your message, in your prompt, how you approach a problem. We know as engineers when we're given a problem, first I would look at this I would look at this thing, then I would look at this, then I would look at this. That is what you're doing in the prompt. A lot of the now newer models, Opus and things like that, a lot of what you're doing when you give it a question and you see that thinking, it is really just writing a prompt, or writing one of these prompts, is writing a better prompt that then it goes and does the work. So you're rolling the dice and it's getting better and better at it, but if you give it a better starting prompt and you tell like, when I'm doing it as an analyst, or when I am solving a problem, when I want you to debug this issue, I want you to look at this, and then I want you to check this other file, then I want you to check that other file. You're giving how you would solve the problem, and then it can do that letter work, right? This works in all of them. This also would work in how if you're doing a model online and pushing it in there, same thing. You want to give it how you solve the problem step by step. It is still our thinking, right? It should be AI in the loop. You're the human. We tell it exactly what we want it to do and how we want it to solve the problem. And this also helps a lot in burning tokens, right? Either I can do the thinking, or we can roll the dice and let the AI do the thinking, and that's where you start getting into that's not how we would have solved it. That's wrong. Is it wrong, or did you just solve it a different way? You weren't thinking, you weren't doing it how you would have done it. To the next thing, it's like now formatting constraints. This one is really interesting. This is more about like how you want it to be the answer, right? This can be into like, I want a summary, I want the details, I want it to be things like that. Now, for us an engineer, we can take, that we're more familiar, we have a few extra tools to do that, where even in the prompt, items like JSON or XML, they have already some inherent structure to it and extra context that we're giving it, right? We have the objects, we have the summary, we can tell it what format we expect and the response to come back. So even if you're not necessarily using JSON, by giving it this, you're giving it a structure of how you want your answer to come back and what information you're expecting for each of the answers, right? And one of the nice things about this LM kind of we've had from before with programming, that like interface was the hard part, right? Making sure we got the format right every time. One of the benefits of LLM is that like that interface can be mushy, right? It is really good at taking data from one way and converting it to another one. That is really where it's strongest at. So in defining these constraints, we can get that data out, but it can also help give us. So you can be, as it's in there, in one of these constraints, one of the things that really works well, Claude really loves this. When you are putting questions where you're giving context, wrapping it around XML tags that give it a definition, like, hey, this is a transcript, or this is my SQL schema. Just opening and closing XML brackets on it will make your response so much better, because it doesn't have to spend time in understanding what that piece of context is, right? And it can just go reference it. That helps you get a lot bigger context in there. And all of these techniques are what's happening in your, in your agents.md file, in your memory files, right? This is all following more or less kind of the same rules. So as you start understanding it, you can know when to ask it, right? You shouldn't be writing a lot of these things. You could be like, hey, we'll get into this a little later. I'm kind of jumping the gun ahead a little bit, but so I'll make sure to get to that point in a second. And then finally, prompt compression. This is when we start getting more into we're deploying it out there. We may have done a lot of specificity, a lot of in there, and then suddenly we have a prompt that's 2,000 tokens, right? That starts adding up when you're running it in there. In the same thing, the models themselves are really good at compressing it and keeping a similar output with a lot less tokens. So you can ask it, be like, hey, this was my output. I know I'm getting a consistent result with this. Let me, compress it so that I'm keeping the same functionality, but I'm using a lot less tokens. It's in there. And you, of course, with anything you compress, you're losing a little quality. Same thing that happens with a JPEG. You want to save a little space. You want to save in there. You are losing a little quality when it comes down. And that's where, same thing. It's the same engineering trade-offs we've had to do all the time, right? Do we want latency, this? It's still the same conversation we've been having always. It hasn't really changed. Here, kind of going to take it as an example of, same thing, that naked prompt, that initial one, how you would go step by step and adding the role, adding some specificity, right? How that prompt kind of grows when you add it like now chain of thought, right? You start adding more of that steps, and then when you start adding the constraints into how you want that answer provided. And then, of course, as part of the prompt itself, you add some validation, right? You can have it double check itself, right? Of course, not every time is perfect, but you can see how when you're building these things, they kind of bat up and build on top of each other. For every prompt, you don't need to go as far as this, right? If you're having the conversation, your tools day to day, you're not going to need to do this. But if you are going to have it do a task where you're getting ready to just let it run for like an hour because you've built out the specs, you've built out this really good prompt, you built out your PDR, this is sort of the stuff that it needs to then go and be like, okay, let me go work for 20 minutes and come back with an answer. Something like this is what you're building, right? You're giving it how you would break down the problem so that then it can go in there. And you're not wasting time or going down the wrong path of 100,000 lines change with something you didn't mean to. Because the more you can put of your own expertise and knowledge into that initial ask, the better results you're going to get and the more consistent results you're going to get. And now, this is the fun part, and this is like, we've gone through this, and the part is like, I wanted to give you the names of things so that then you can ask it, because we don't have to be English majors to do it. Like, that's the new language, but we don't have to do it. I am a horrible writer, but now you can use the AI themselves and the models to help you write those prompts. So this is kind of from iteration. It's a prompt that I use. I just have it as a GPT in myself and call it as a project. And when I'm thinking of a new idea, I just, I have this at the beginning, and you can just literally copy and paste this in a conversation and then just put in like, starting it and having that back and forth conversation to get rid of all the assumptions. And you end up with some really good prompts at the end, right? Helping you write blogs, helping you make decisions, helping you a meeting summarizer, right? From kind of following this, I've built myself a nice little meeting summarizer that I can take the scripts or in there and a whole bunch of just random thoughts from the conversations in a meeting. And it gives me a really consistent notes, actions, what was discussed, what was in there that I can kind of keep building up on. But from here, you can see we kind of talked about it. This is a chain, you can see the chain of thought here. You can see the constraints. You can see the sequentially how I want you to approach the problem and keeping it and optimizing it as part of it. and have that conversation. But as I kind of talked about it, then I went down to be like, all right, I want you to compress this, right? That was all really it took. Like, hey, this is great, but I want you to compress this into a shorter prompt that I can more have it easy as a copy and paste. And it did that, right? It created this. It simplified. It still kind of keeps a very good and similar answers back and forth in there. So it depends on what you're using it for, right? For the quick and dirty, kind of keep this one. If I want to go more into detail and have conversations, because that can happen. Sometimes your prompt can get too expansive. Like one for writing tutorials and things for AI, it's like documentation as an architect. They got to be, my GPT got to the point where it was doing like 20 questions for a simple email or Slack message. So you can go too far in that way. So I had to create a lean prompt for what I was doing, the tone that I had set, to be like when I need to just make a quick email or a Slack message or an invite, it's in there. When I'm writing a bigger document or some policy or something, I go and use still the bigger prompt where it makes sense for me to go through those 20 questions to make sure I'm covering all my bases. So it kind of technique is in there, and that's where I think I'm challenging all of you here to start kind of thinking more in structure. A lot of this is, you don't have to worry so much about the particular language. It's a lot about the structure that you're using, testing how it works for your use cases, see what actually helps and what doesn't for how you're working. And then, help AI help you, right? It's really good at taking what you mean and working through with you back and forth that we haven't had before into doing that. This QR code is just a GitHub repo that I've had of some prompts that I've kind of worked and keep reusing. So it started like a private repo, and I just kind of opened it up of some things. Like one of them I have is like optimized docs that I use for when I'm starting a project to help me create help me clean up and organize the doc file, help me do like my architecture decision, my plans and stuff like that. So it makes that work over back and forth for my own, for my projects. But I've seen some other people have had those conversations back and forth. I know I kind of went through a little bit quickly, but if anybody has any questions, please ask them as you're going through. This makes it a lot better. If there's anything you want me to dig deep in a little bit in there, are we all kind of good up to? Yes. So, in two places. I've been really using Obsidian because it is a Markdown editor and you keep all your files in Markdown. I've actually even started just having a Claude session open on that Obsidian thing to help me even edit and create those Markdown, documents. But now with, same thing, going back to the CLI, your Claude or Codex skills. That's what they are. They're the things that you reuse every time. And it goes to the same thing. The way that you create a skill is you start a conversation, you start a new chat, and you're like, hey, I want to create this skill. Or even if you're making it used to be agents, it has a really good in there, but Codex, the new desktop app, has a skill creator app where you're like, hey, I am wanting to do this. And then you talk through it into actually making sure you get that good, that exact behavior that you're looking to have it done. But that's where I kind of keep them. I'm really hoping that there's some way that you can technically reuse the same skill in both places. They're following the same format, but now you have to kind of copy and paste them from two files in your root system. Or you can set up same linking, but that is the way. The things that I use day to day, I have them in just as commands or as skills, right? I think just going a little more technical on there, if you're using them with the CLI tools, you have skills that are specific for a project, and then you have your user level. I tend to, as many things, keep them at the project level because there's a lot of things that then I can tweak and modify, even if I've reused them and just create them in each project. But like, if I have an Astro project, right? If I have a Java project, I may want the code reviewer to focus on certain things if this is a backend project, if this is a front-end project. So even though I may start with the base one, I may just be like, when I start the conversation, it's like, hey, this is this, but but modify it to apply to the things that we have talked about in the instructions in this project. So that way, when you load up each one, you have that context that's very specific. And that's one of the good and hard things when you're working in an organization, is trying to find like that balance of, we want to build shared tooling. We want people to kind of have a consistent work. But with AI, it's really easy and really beneficial to build tools for yourself that work the way you want to work, right? You no longer have to change your work to how this SaaS company, how Jira does it, right? You can finally do tickets or do work the way that your brain works and that your thing works. So it's that push and pull. I don't think there's a real answer right now. And same thing, all of this that I'm sharing, it's pretty much what everybody's been throwing at the wall for the past year. And honestly, a lot of this year, like it's changed in the last 2 months with the models coming out in there. It's what throw at the wall, and it's what we're seeing stick to it. It may change in 6 months, but that's why in this talk, I'm like, the basics of it are gonna stay the same, right? The way we talk to it and the way we think about it are going to be the same. The syntax may change a little, but hopefully this is not something. Now, getting into a little bit more of the advanced patterns, these are some of the things that start getting into more of when you're building those agents that are running in there, right? When you want to do a little bit more heavier work. We saw chain of thought earlier. This is where you have it defined and I want you to tackle this problem. But sometimes you're doing exploration, right? You're not really sure what the answer is. You just have a lot of data. Maybe you're exploring a new code repo that hasn't been set up to work with it. You're just coming to it fresh. This is where a tree of thought approach does. What this does is that this will have it look at a problem from different perspectives and then kind of come in from a consistent side. This is more or less the way that the pro models, the GPT pro models that are in there, they are essentially creating prompts like this, but they're doing it in thousands. And that's why they spent an hour or something doing the work of that research level thing. They are just creating these tree of thought prompts and kind of keep going out to come, to find a consensus. But this is something you can very easily do when you're coming into a new project. Be like, hey, this is a new repo. I am trying to solve this. Write these instructions out as a tree of thought, and then you execute them, right? So suddenly this will write the instructions on how to explain it out, how to look through the problem. So the same works as if you're looking in a UI, you're looking through some documents, you're looking through a database, you're looking through data, or just in your own code base. It all kind of works. And by understanding what you're calling it, what you're asking for it to do, it can rewrite prompts that way. You don't have to worry about so much. And then you see it and you modify the few words that you need to make sure that it's exactly what you want it to do. Same thing if you're doing some sort of validation, or if validation is more important, you want to spend tokens, self-consistency, right? That's what the name of those prompts are. This is where you are looking for an answer and you're still having it based on the different, different methodologies, different chain of thoughts, get to an answer, and then you have the model at the final step compared to it to make sure that you're getting a consistent answer from both of them. Right? Same thing, is that take different approaches and then at the bottom, compare them and tell me why they are or why they're not. This is something that it is really good at and giving you, and goes back to a lot of the techniques that we talked about, right? Chain of thought, the limiter, and even at the end. Oh, sorry, I did not realize half of it was gone. You get to the validation, and then in the output, you're putting that delimiter of how I want you to show me the answer, right? This is what I care about to see. I don't want you writing 3 paragraphs of something. And it matters to the case, right? It matters where you are or kind of what it's doing. And then finally, this pattern is the one that works really well for agentic. When people say agentic, it's for me, it was really hard to see okay, how do I make that one that's different? The React pattern works really well when you have tools because you're asking it to essentially look at a problem, make a hypothesis, scientific method, right? It's the scientific method in a prompt. Look at a problem based on the tools that you're given. Go look at that, go try to find an answer. Come back to the results. Think about the answer. See if that's still now is hypothesis, or if you need to go a step further to answer your question. And part of this you can tell, only go five loops in there, right? In our day-to-day work, like one of them, we've really been using it for finding. I play on finding why there's difference in like ticket sales for in there, right? And we tell usually our user suspects are weather, time of year, things like that. So it will go through that data and it will kind of look through each of those problems from the data that we've given it, the semantic model and all that stuff. It can go and query those numbers from the data, gets back, be like, nope, this was a bad assumption, did not prove it out, but from the data, did not prove it out. And then you get a response in there of what it thinks. It was like, hey, I do have confidence in this, I don't have confidence in this, or this, these data validated my assumption here. And same thing, the prompt itself got written by, the main prompt, I sort of had an idea, I had looked through it, I saw that it was sort of working, it's like, okay, rewrite this as in the React pattern. And I wrote it, and then we ran it, and it just jumped in, Inked, and now we're tweaking it to make sure that we are, the things that we're selling to explore, the assumptions are in there, going back to our salespeople and being like, okay, same thing. We go back to how would you solve the problem, right? If you are trying to solve the solution before AI, what would you be looking for? What data would you be looking for? And that kind of feeds back into this. The people that are experts in the domain field know how they would solve the problem, and bringing that knowledge and assumption into the patterns just helps this drive more and more. So, yeah, that's all I had. So, yeah, if anybody has any questions or anything we can help, yes.
The prompt that suggested an LLM to use 3 different methods to analyze and then like this.
Mm-hmm.
So doing exactly this versus running 4 separate prompts, other prompts.
You can do that, and that's the thing. This is a lot of that sub-agent kind of mentality. So in Claude, the way that it would take this prompt is that it would create 4 sub-agents and go through that and then kind of come back. And that's how you keep the context. When you're having those sub-agents in Claude Code work, that's literally what they're doing. They're like, this one takes the chunk of the problem with this persona, with this. So you can go a lot further if you have things, for example, you have a financial analyst persona, you have engineering persona, you can have it tackle those problems kind of in their own approach and then come back and, and kind of build a consensus for the answer. Is that what you're? Yeah.
It's really automated. I don't need to run myself.
Yes. Yeah, and a lot of these models can do that. And in a lot of when you add the thinking or extended thinking, if you actually expand it to show that it's thinking, you see that the first thing that it does is it will write a prompt like this. It'll try one of these styles or techniques, and then it will just run that prompt. So it's yeah. No. I think that was this. Yeah.
Do you have any tips and tricks on avoiding something like context drops, for very long prompts, or if you have a long-running chat session going on with the model? Oftentimes, key details get dropped if you want it to be context. How do you avoid typically the context drop from happening in the prompt that you're writing on the section that you're happy with?
Yeah. Are we talking here in your coding session, right?
Correct. Or you have a GitHub Copilot section, or you have a big prompt.
Right.
System instruction.
So there's a couple of things to kind of put in the mental model yourselves, that these models are being made to make themselves be more efficient, in a way lazy. So if you give it too much prompt, as soon as it thinks it knows the answer, it'll stop reading the context and kind of go through it. And that's what you're getting with the context run, right? same as a person, or they'll read the beginning, scan a little through the middle, and then just look at the end, and then it's a lost in the middle kind of things. Now, what in the context of these agents, this is where you have memory files. All that really means is that you're asking it to write down as a markdown file in your code what it's been doing. So usually the planning mode, take advantage of the planning mode built in, and then being like, write out the plan. That's what the big thing, the prompt that I did with the optimize was just like a couple of things, like write out your plan, write them out, and then rewrite them, right? So you have this kind of consistent, it's really good at just creating that text and rewriting it, so that what I do is I have the plan written out, and then I have it as he finishes things, kind of marks out their to-dos, like checks them off, and then I can do the compact, or I can do just clear and start up again. And in the instructions of the agents file, it goes always check the plan and be like, all right, we're planned now, we're going to phase 2 or phase 2.1. And then it knows it just needs to go through those things. But it's always, you're kind of dumping the memory into a text file. And yeah. But the kind of trick, I want to say trick words, but the words that I found that is using is always, I now have a docs file like with all my repos where I have it do architecture decisions, plans, the like active plans that I'm doing, and then the architecture decisions. If I get to something where I've corrected it in some way, my next line is usually like, okay, the things that is here, update your instructions or update the architectural decisions, right? If we did a big chunk of work, like this is how I want to do testing. Make sure you write a document on how we're doing testing on the decisions. Or if I connected it to a new repo, we just went through a session where I got some good results in like looking at APIs, like, okay, take those and copy us. And making sure you kind of write it down and lock it down, because then the next time it will reference that first. Like that becomes the base, like that becomes the first thing that reads that instruction file. But you don't want that instruction file to get too long. So what most of them are really good at is being like that instruction file should be almost like a table of contents, right? The main things that you care about, but then being like anything authentication, read this file. Anything that's to do with your API goes to this file. And that's where like that architecture in the docs file starts becoming. The benefit to that is that a lot of the things that were in engineers' head that were in there, like this is how this project works, or this is how we do styling, this is how we do casing, this is how we do formatting, starts being documented. The things that we know we were always supposed to be doing, but we never had the time to do, it's now so much easier to, as we're working through it, to get it into the heads. And that way the next developer coming can start using those best practices and the code start becoming a little more consistent. And that kind of goes into the skills of being like, this is what really worked for this project, right? For every code review, we need to keep in mind these 3 things, right? May not be for the other one, so you want to have those code reviewers that like architecture planner, having a planner for that project works really well, because that planner you can tell be like, for this one, this is the business context. Like these are the name of the databases you're going to be pulling up. These are the schema. So when it's working, it's not having to go out and explore and spend 10 minutes exploring the same thing over and over again. You may have done it once and you spend the time on like exploring it and really defining what you need, and then you lock it down by a memory file. And you just ask it like, write a memory file of this, and then you can go in and tweak it yourself or move it or just have a conversation to keep optimizing it. So that's been in there, and by doing that, whenever I do a big chunk of work, I just clear it and start anew, because I no longer have to spend 10 minutes getting it restarted, right? Or if I'm closing out for the day and come in there, I just write a skill that's called reload context. And I tell it be like, read the instructions and look at the plans directory and look at where I left off, and then give me suggestions of what should be the next thing that I do. So that like getting primed became like became a one-line code that takes 2 minutes.
So as you're moving from chat to chat, you're kind of telling AI to synthesize the content of what's in your chat into a markdown file, so it's a handoff point for the next session.
Yeah, and that keeps it and even that way, even if you're going long and you compact, because it's part of the instructions to always reference that, the compact doesn't cost as much memory run. Like the compact's becoming better, but you're keeping track, and you can see. With all of this, you can always see what's in there if you go through that JSON-LD file, because it's writing down everything. But it's in there. It's a lot of stuff, and it'll just try to do it without having to reread all that stuff. So by you being able to see what it does and kind of having it spell out what it does. The one thing that took a little bit of finagling was that rewriting, because it just wants to create a new document every time. Like that is the default behavior. And then you're at the same point. It's like, no, don't do that. Like just rewrite what we're doing. Like, keep it. I use the word like living documentation. Same thing. It's a term that we know we're supposed to do, and like it brings a lot of best practice and context in there. That's a industry term. So the more industry terms you use, the better, because it brings out a lot of what it means without you having to spell it out. Yeah.
So I like this idea, but one thing you said is like, with the having it write documentation, I feel like we'd fall into the same trap of just having documentation that we wrote that's no longer relevant. And so how do we deal with that? Because I mean, it takes discipline. Like of course you have the AI like update this, right? But it takes discipline. It's not going to do that on its own. You have to like instruct it to do that. And if people aren't instructing to do that, then you're not getting the documentation updated. And
it's a little bit of that muscle. Same thing. It's kind of it becomes end up being like this is a PR requirement kind of thing, like right. And this is where it can almost be. You can even make it like a hook, right? Because it's a command to like, hey, from this PR, update the relevant documentation. This is where it kind of changes of like all of that work that we knew we had to do, but same thing. We get in there, we're not reading. We should be reading it. We're probably not going to read it, but it is that like the AI is running it for itself, so it can become almost a PR hook or even a GitHub action that you run. Like as part of the PR, go through and update the documentation for this project based on the changes of this PR, and that becomes kind of the PR. Like this is where it kind of opens of like we get to build tools for each project for how we work, how we want to work. Cool. Yeah.
So, writing a prompt or a skill in Markdown format, wouldn't it consume more tokens and the context window, eat up the context window for just adding new lines or periods or hash or anything? So, isn't it just for human readability?
Not as much. I mean, text is really small. Most big instruction files and things like that are really, ends up being like 10 or 100 tokens. So here, let me, this is a really simple one, but this is from,
For every turn of conversation, we need to send the system prompt or the scale file, right? So every time these special characters or whatever we use for Markdown format, that eat up the context window.
There's improvements for that. Like now, a lot of them do caching, but it's a lot less than some of the other systems. So, starting a new conversation here, you need context. Okay, so from here you can see that the system's charted by itself. This is stuff we don't see. The tools is what Claude brings by itself is 3,000 tokens. The memory files that I put, it's only 2,000 tokens, right? And this has all my documents, all my things that have been in there, and the instructions files. But from what you see, all you have, it's one little tiny bit. And this is probably 10 long markdown files. So in the amount of tokens versus if you load up an MCP, even the lightest MCPs of Playwright or this like that, that's like 10,000 tokens. So having more, like even a skill, writing a skill for doing that's why Playwright went to the CLI, because the Playwright MCP was, and this is just for those, this is more a front end thing, but Playwright is just it's an end-to-end testing tool, but they had this where you can open up a browser and navigate and do things to give it that kind of control. The Chrome MCP is like 50,000 K, like 20,000 K, right? Versus doing it just having a CLI and having all the spec for that CLI, it's it's less than 1,000 K. So it kind of becomes in there, and this is where you start kind of even managing the same way that you would manage memory when you're running, when you're running an application, right? You start deciding what's worth having and what you need to turn on and off right now. But yeah, you can get into that thing where you have too much. But when you get to that, same thing. Fixing it is now just another command of, hey, compress this, right? And then just checking the answers. So all of that used to be a lot of manual work, a lot of the things. It's now so much easier to do, and we can be explicit where we need to, and efficient where we want to as well. Yeah.
I'm not sure you're offloading out of your agents MD or Claude MD to the docs, just pointing to other docs. Because I like that idea since I don't know, I hesitate to put too much in there because if I'm asking one question about this one thing and it's got information about something I'm not asking about, then that's not relevant and it's just wasting tokens and also introducing possible confusion to the model.
Right. A lot of those specific things where you're you only need to read this if you're solving that problem. Claude and Codex have become really good at only reading those extra documents when they need to solve that problem. Like the latest models.
Without referencing them in your agents file?
No, all you have to do is reference it. But same thing, it's a table of context, so it's like that agent's, your MD file, your agent's instruction file would say, when you're doing authentication, when you're doing database, this is where all the information is. So it only loads those next files when it's answering a problem for that. So, all right, thank you. Anything else?